My name is Mike Sygula. I'm the founder of TrueFear.com, and I'm here with Ben Joseph Stewart, who is an American filmmaker, musician, and researcher. And some of you might know his productions. He created some legendary documentary films such as Kaimatica, Esoteric Agenda 1 and 2. We're going to share some links in the comments. Behind him, you can see Psychedelica. It's a Gaia TV show, TV series that he hosts as well. Obviously, he talks about psychedelics. So he made some really interesting shows, interesting documentary films, and his recent documentary is called DMT Quest, and covers, DMT, which maybe you can start by telling us what is DMT for those people of our listeners who might not be aware of it.
For sure. DMT, it's dimethyltryptamine, and it's a naturally occurring compound in nature. But we in the West, we only heard of it, let's say back in the 40s and 50s, I believe that's when it was finally isolated. And then it wasn't until maybe 10 years later that it was found to be an extremely powerful psychedelic. We know it today as being probably the most fast-acting and powerful psychedelic. And that's when smoked in the form of chunga. And there's also 5-MeO DMT, which is different. 5-MeO DMT from the toad. If you hear people saying toad medicine, that's different than NN-DMT. So if somebody just says DMT, they're talking about the very visual NN-DMT, which is found in almost every plant, every mammal, also humans. So our brain produces DMT. But up until recently, we haven't understood anything about it. We didn't even understand where in the brain it was produced. And it wasn't until 2019 out of the University of Michigan that we began finding out that the entire brain produces DMT, and not even in just tiny amounts, but in basically amounts comparable to serotonin and dopamine, very important neurotransmitters for us. So why? Why do we produce such a powerful psychedelic, and why do we produce it all the time in higher amounts than we once believed? So does it have something to do with how we perceive reality? Is reality a partial hallucination? These are some of the topics that we get into in DMT Quest. And I got to give a shout out to John Chavez. He's the founder of DMT Quest. So go to dmtquest.org and you'll see that this is a huge mission to start understanding why do we produce psychedelics in our brain.
Yeah, there is, as I said, very little research, and actually a lot of people still don't know much about it. Like, I was speaking to my dad and some friends today, and I asked them about DMT, and they didn't know anything about it. So, we have Mike Tyson, who made it popular like a year ago, 2 years ago, I'm not sure. You actually mentioned Mike Tyson in the documentary. Can you tell us a little bit about his experience, what was going on? Because it's quite interesting. You have this ego-driven former heavyweight champion who is, when you get to fighters, they always like have massive ego, and suddenly he becomes this spiritual person after a single experience with 5-MeO DMT.
Isn't that wild? Like, so somebody who their entire life has been just drenched in ego, money, fame, like he was, he went to jail, was arrested. I should say, he was just a guy who, I mean, very interesting backstory. But if you think about it, drenched in ego, and for the most part, if you were to try and rehabilitate somebody that has a lot of ego through talk therapy, imagine how long that would take. I mean, I imagine that would take an entire lifetime to truly, unless there were like very big, profound moments. But you can see humbling moments like somebody, they're living their life, they're totally egoic, and then all of a sudden they lose a limb. That would humble a person. losing a child, or, you know, the country going to war, and just something completely jarring you out of your patterns of ego. Smoking a psychedelic substance and giving you roughly a 10 to 15-minute experience can give you that level of an ego disruptor. So that's pretty interesting. And it's also, you don't have to lose a limb. You don't have to lose somebody. A country doesn't have to go to war. And you don't have to go through 10, 15 years of meditation. You're really just having this like moment where everything is ripped away from you. And therein kind of lies the issue. You don't really, if you do a psychedelic, you don't have to do anything other than say yes to, you know, putting it in your mouth, chewing it, or smoking it, and that experience is given to you. But that also means that the work isn't done. You know, once you get a vision of that, all that you've gotten was a glimpse that there's more to reality. And so Mike Tyson, heavyweight champion, all about money, all of a sudden, you're right, he takes this one experience of toad medicine, 5-MeO DMT, and he just said reality was just ripped away from him. And then afterwards, he had to start piecing it back together. And I saw him on his podcast, man. He looked humbled. And now everyone that comes onto his podcast, he's asking them about like their philosophies on life and death and, you know, spirituality. That's a changed man. And that's pretty incredible that a substance, just a tiny bit of a substance turned into a smoke, you inhale it, 15 minutes later, your life has changed forever. We need to understand more about this substance.
Yeah, so like for example, I've had my single experience with regular DMT, and you know, I had this feeling of being consciousness, not being, you know, part of my body. But I heard on actually that 5-MeO, you get a proper experience where you basically lose the filter of your body, and you see yourself as your essence, which is just pure consciousness, right? So have you had, what was your experience like? You've tried it a couple of times, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've done 5-MeO and I've done NN DMT. I'm really like a psychonaut, as many would say. But you know, what's kind of funny is people say, you know, somebody who's tried every psychedelic, like, man, they're crazy. They're, you know, they're like people who want to jump out of perfectly good airplanes and we're thrill seekers. And that's actually not, that's not the full truth. Like, yeah, I love thrills, but that's not why I do any psychedelic. I do psychedelics to help understand aspects of myself. So I'm a self-seeker. And so really the times that I've done psychedelics, and specifically DMT, it's so rapid. Like, so ayahuasca, it comes on slowly. LSD, mushrooms, peyote, they all come on very slowly, and they'll bring you into that space, but they'll do it in a very slow story arc. For DMT, you're just bam, you're there, and you're there for like 10 minutes, and then it just goes away as quickly as it came almost. And yeah, you have this moment where you're not in this world anymore. And there's a lot of people who say there's a difference between DMT and other psychedelics. Whereas most other psychedelics, they distort this reality. And with enough of a dose, you can go to another reality. But DMT, it doesn't just take you into a very distorted version of this reality. It takes you to a very ordered, not a messy, but an ordered version of a different reality, one that's less constrained by physics and, you know, linear time and 3 dimensions of space. It's less constrained by that. But if you think about it, 20% of people who experience or who have cardiac arrest, 20% of those people where their heart experiences cardiac arrest have a near-death experience. And a near-death experience is typified by leaving the body, having an out-of-body experience. And when people have an out-of-body experience, you'll have people who are blind their entire lives being able to see, people who are deaf their entire lives being able to hear, but not even seeing and hearing just the way that we do in 3-dimensional reality. They can hear conversations in other areas, maybe through walls, in other sides of the planet at the same time, and understand it all at the same time. So there's something that's that's definitely needing to be looked at here. There's people like Stuart Hameroff and Sir Roger Penrose, where they're looking into the microtubules inside the neurons, these little tiny filaments. And they say that the chemicals of psychedelics bind with tubulin in the microtubules, and they actually send the microtubules into a vibratory pattern that is a quantum coherence vibratory pattern, meaning that when you take psychedelics, your microtubules in your neurons are, in a sense, resonating with quantum phenomena. And we know that quantum phenomena, they don't behave the same way that anything in physics does. There's retrograde causality, where the present can affect the past, or so it seems to our physical reality, as well as non-locality, meaning that something like an electron can literally not exist anywhere in particular, but it can exist as a potential in multiple different locations. So now imagine you take a psychedelic and bam, you're ripped out of this three-dimensional reality that I know how to control when I'm using my intellect, and you're in this other space where intellect doesn't work anymore. And you're in the quantum realm, potentially, where time works differently, space works differently. So you can break this down in the brain, and all these governors that the human lobe of the brain, the third layer, doesn't communicate to the mammalian layer or the reptilian layer of the brain until we have like a very truly novel moment, like we're almost hit by a car, or an animal is chasing us, or we're in a fight. That's when we're communicating between the human, the mammalian, and the reptilian brain. Well, psychedelics strips away that disconnect to where everything in your subconscious mind is coming up to the conscious mind. So there's something very curious happening here. And now I got to go back to, why are we producing DMT in our brain at all? And what happens when we stop producing it so much? Is it because our pineal gland becomes calcified? Is it because we're so habituated, like the same time every single day we have our coffee, we smoke our cigarette, we go to the bathroom, we go to sleep, we have the same cycles. And when we're in that routine, in that pattern, DMT doesn't have a chance to really do its job, which is to break us out of our habituation. And that's what psychedelics seem to do. They break us out of our rigidity and allow us to see life again like a little baby, this child that doesn't really know what life has in store for it. So that was a big tangent, but like DMT trips seem to do the same thing, and that's awaken us out of our own patterns, the obstacles that we place in our own way of our conscious expansion.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is you guys featured Wim Hof in your documentary, and I've been practicing Wim Hof's breathing method for less than 1 year, very, very intensely, like a couple of times a day. And sometimes if I do a proper session, like 10 minutes at least, I start getting similar effects to effects on psychedelics. So basically, there is a correlation with intense breathing and release of DMT by brain endogenously, right?
Yeah, dude. The Wim Hof thing is such a cool phenomena. Wim Hof, for the audience that may not know, he's a Dutchman who holds 26 Guinness Book World Records, mainly for a breathing technique that can basically, it decouples our pain protein. So when you do this breathing technique, these pain proteins decouple, and so you're not receiving the same kind of pain when you take an ice bath. And that's usually, there's two things that get you out of an ice bath. One is just it's uncomfortable. The second thing is pain. And those aren't the same thing. And so if you can release the pain protein, then you can experience things that are uncomfortable, but without the pain. And the pain is just a messenger inside the body. So Wim Hof noticed that, like, a simple breathing technique allows for you to control your immune system. It allows for you to control your thermal regulation in your body, so what temperature your body goes to. And what he started noticing is that you do these breathing techniques, which is really almost like holotropic breathing, but it's a big inhale, a relaxed exhale, over and over again for a couple minutes, and then you hold. And breath retention is a big part of it. What people notice is that they'll start having a DMT-like experience. So they're going to start seeing kaleidoscopic visuals. They're going to start experiencing a lot of things like physiological sensations. They're going to connect with emotional trauma from their childhood. All these things are reported not just by one or two people, by hundreds of thousands of people, and that do this breathing technique. So we decided, let's find out if there's correlations scientifically. There's enough anecdotal evidence to say that the Wim Hof breathing technique releases endogenous DMT inside the brain. And endogenous means inside the body. It's produced inside. Exogenous means you're smoking an external source, and that's an exogenous DMT source. Does a breathing technique cause for your brain to produce more DMT? Well, it feels like it, but now we started having a little bit more scientific proof. The EEG profile, which is the brainwave patterns that you can see, Imperial College London shows that your brain emits when you smoke DMT, is almost identical to the brain patterns, the EEG patterns that you emit when you're doing the Wim Hof breathing technique. So this is the first step in saying it looks like there's a correlation. It actually looks like if you alter your breathing, you can produce more DMT inside your body. Now we have to start looking at, we can consciously activate psychedelic states inside of us. I bet you can do the same with opiates, which we know we have dopamine. We also have endogenous alcohol. We have endogenous PCP analogs, endogenous cannabinoids from cannabis. We have all this within. I bet you with our own focus of our mind, triggers in our body like breathing and postures and mudras, I guarantee we can tap into and be the alchemist and change our own neurochemistry and hormones to get into whatever psychological and emotional state we wish to be in. It's a theory. It's mine and several people's theory.
And is there any real science done that tries to understand, why do we produce DMT, or what is its role? Anything you guys mentioned? You featured the one PhD guy who was doing some research, but there's very little studies, right? Like almost non-existent, right?
So little, and that's why we need more funding for research, and that's what we're working on right now. So the guy you're talking about is Mauro Zapatera, and he is a cerebrospinal fluid specialist. And cerebrospinal fluid is the fluid that bathes your brain. It goes all the way down your spinal column, and there's like a respiratory cycle of it, and they call it, it's about 90 to 120 seconds, and it's almost like the ocean tides. And in fact, cerebrospinal fluid is created when your brain in embryonic state closes around the amniotic fluid. That becomes the cerebrospinal fluid, and it's one element away from seawater. So we actually have the sea in our bodies, and it carries things like DMT. It carries a bunch of different neurochemicals. But when you do the Wim Hof breathing, you can actually change the flow of your cerebrospinal fluid. And if you do increase the amount of DMT inside you, then yes, you will start forcing all that DMT up inside the brain. I see Lee Forrester says, yes, we can get to these states without taking anything. Great discussion. It's true. I mean, we don't need to take external sources. And so Wim Hof, he mentions, and this isn't scientifically proven, but this is what he says. Melatonin, which is produced by the pineal gland, which it regulates our sleep cycles and does several other things for us. But melatonin minus CO2 is structurally identical to DMT. So the interesting thing is when you do breathing techniques, the main thing is, yes, you're oxygenating your body, but the main thing that's actually happening more than oxygenating the body is decreasing the levels of carbon dioxide inside the body. And so if you're decreasing carbon dioxide inside the body, you might actually rob, and this is called cannibalism. It's chemical cannibalism, where if you have melatonin and it has a carbon dioxide structure, it can be cannibalized and robbed from the melatonin, turning the melatonin into structurally identical to DMT. Now, I'm not a neurochemist. I don't know if this is actually sound, but Wim Hof believes that it is. He's not stating that it is. He believes that it is. And this is why there are other scientists that are like, well, we need to study this because it could very well act like an analog to DMT by robbing robbing carbon dioxide off of melatonin. And even Joe Dispenza shows that melatonin, if you tweak it a little bit, you get serotonin, I think you get oxytocin, you can get, again, DMT. There's quite a few other chemicals, neurochemicals, that augment our mind, open the vasculature of our heart, make us feel connected and bonded with other human beings. All these things could be accessible just by practices of focusing the mind, and in a sense, focusing the mind on the breath, and the breathing is a physiological thing. If you can align the body and mind, imagine, you can be the alchemist, you can change your inner chemistry. And again, there needs to be so much more studies of this, but all ancient religions, let me say this, instead of just saying all of them, Buddhism, a lot of the, like, Sufism, in Jainism, in Hinduism, in yoga, in Tai Chi, in a lot of these, there is a focus of the mind, and there is a stilling of the breath, and an active cognizant usage of the breath while stilling the mind and moving the body in very flowy ways or holding certain postures. And all of this has a massive effect on the mind. So I think this is something we need a lot more research on. I'm really excited for the future of it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So guys, Ben has to go. Next time we're gonna do a proper session.
Yeah, I have like 5-6 more minutes if you had an extra question.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So what's the goal? You're doing fundraising, right? What's the name of the website?
DMTQuest.org. And you can also go to benjosephstewart.com. And if you scroll down, you'll see the film, and then you'll also see the GoFundMe. That's for like the crowdfunding. We're going to need millions of dollars, so we're also going to other funders to raise that money. But as far as making films around it, that's where I come in as an artist. I get to learn about all this awesome stuff because I'm an artist, and I love making films on topics that will, raise consciousness, that will empower people. So we're not just complaining about the outside world, but we acknowledge that I think the major problems of the world, aside from, specifically like, 5G and things like that, which could potentially change electromagnetic radiation and so on and so forth, I think we need to heal as a species. A lot of the polarization in politics and stuff like that, it doesn't come by pointing the finger at the other side and pointing out what they've done wrong. I really think we need to heal. So I think that we need to raise awareness that we have this power, and that we think we're victims of so much, but we scarcely understand how much power we actually have to change our neurochemistry. Now imagine this, I'll just say this real quick. For intractable depression that no medication on the market can help, for intractable anxiety, for things like obsessive compulsive disorder, bulimia and eating disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, things that no medication can help, psychedelics like psilocybin, LSD, they're finding that these psychedelics like ayahuasca, peyote, ibogaine are able to do things with all those and addiction that no medication could help, no talk therapy could help, no 12-step program could help. And now we're coming to find that Wim Hof breathing does the exact, or has the exact same kind of efficacy on intractable depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, eating disorders, everything that I just named. So there must be at least some overlap between the breathing techniques and psychedelics. And this isn't just so we can experience trippy states and be like, whoa, I met an extraterrestrial being in my experience. It's not just for that. That's incredible. But this is also to get over some of the major scourges of society and the healing crises that we are experiencing right now. So yeah, we're raising funds for this, and I think it's I think in the next 10 years, technology is going to help us get to a better understanding of how we can access our own innate human potential within us.
Okay, guys, do you have any questions to Ben? Because we'll have to wrap up very quickly. But yeah, check out benjosephstewart.com. Waking Infinity News on YouTube, DMT Quest, and
sorry, I said Mike Lima. It's Mike Lucas. Mike Lucas, who's in the chat right there, he's a Wim Hof instructor, and he was the one in DMT Quest. So what's up, man? He's asking, when is the next one? We're going to start working on it next month. Next month, we're going to start pushing into episode 2 of DMT Quest.
Okay, cool. All right, check out DMT Quest, free to watch on YouTube. Links are in the description. And sorry for technical issues, but next Wednesday we're gonna do a proper session, test everything properly, and we're gonna have another interesting conversation. So, guys, thanks a lot for joining us today, and share this with your friends. Until next time.